My sister-in-law convinced my husband to change our will, removing me as beneficiary in case I left him. She drew up papers making herself executor while I remained oblivious. His family celebrated their smart planning while pitying his risky marriage. When he signed the documents, he had no idea what I'd already changed. Let's just make sure she walks away with nothing. The words hit me like ice water as I stood frozen outside Elise's sitting room, the silver tea tray trembling in my hands. The delicate china cups rattled against their saucers, creating a symphony of betrayal that seemed to echo through the hallway. I pressed my back against the wall, barely breathing as my mother-in-law's laugh, that same warm laugh she'd given me just hours earlier, followed the cruelest sentence I'd ever heard spoken about me. "Oh, Erica, you're terrible," Elise whispered, but her tone carried amusement, not disapproval. "But you're right. We can't let 20 years of building this family's reputation get handed over to someone who could just leave." The irony burned in my chest. Here I was, literally serving them tea like the dutiful daughter-in-law I'd tried so hard to be, while they plotted my financial destruction. My legs felt unsteady, but I forced myself to remain still, to listen, to finally understand what I'd been too naive to see for 3 years. "Wesley's always been too trusting," Erica continued, her voice carrying that same authoritative tone she used when reorganizing his closet or canceling his plans. "Remember Jennifer? At least she had the decency to come from money. This one." She paused and I could practically see her dismissive wave. "This one works at that little marketing firm downtown. What does she make? 40,000 a year. It's embarrassing." The tea tray grew heavier in my hands as memories flooded back. Every sideways glance, every backhanded compliment, every time they'd made me feel small. It all crystallized into this moment of perfect, horrible clarity. I should have seen it coming at our wedding reception. The first red flag had been waving right in front of me, but I'd been too blinded by love and hope to notice. Erica had pulled Wesley away from our head table just as dinner was being served, claiming she needed to discuss something urgent about the photographer. 20 minutes passed while I sat alone, my new husband's empty chair beside me like a physical manifestation of how the rest of our marriage would unfold. "Where did they go?" Great Aunt Margaret had asked, her eyes twinkling with champagne and curiosity. "Just handling some family business," I'd replied, forcing my smile to stay bright while inside, something small and trusting began to wither. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, making polite conversation about the flowers, the music, anything to fill the awkward void left by the groom's absence. When Wesley finally returned, Erica's arm linked possessively through his expression had changed. The soft, adoring look he'd worn during our vows had been replaced by something more distant, more thoughtful. Later, much later, I'd learned she'd spent those 20 minutes planting the first seeds of doubt about my motives for marrying him. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she'd whispered to him, her voice dripping with sisterly concern. "I mean, you know I love her, but gold diggers can be very convincing. They have to be." Of course, I knew none of this at the time. I'd convinced myself Erica's behavior was just protective instinct, the natural wariness of a sister who'd watched over her brother for 32 years. I told myself she'd warm up to me once she realized I genuinely loved Wesley, that I wasn't some opportunistic woman trying to climb the social ladder. How foolish I'd been. Erica had always been the puppet master of Wesley's life, and I'd walked into her carefully orchestrated world without realizing I was disrupting her control. She'd picked his clothes since college, crisp button-downs and tailored slacks that made him look successful but approachable. She'd guided his career decisions, steering him toward the family's accounting firm where she could monitor his progress and connections. Most tellingly, she'd handpicked his previous girlfriends, each one a carbon copy of herself. Wealthy, socially connected, and completely deferential to family hierarchy. I was everything she hadn't ordered from the catalog of appropriate partners. "Some hobbies are more suitable for a man in his position," she'd said just last month when I'd suggested Wesley might enjoy taking cooking classes with me. Her laugh had been sharp enough to cut glass, dismissive enough to end the conversation. Wesley had looked embarrassed, not by her rudeness but by my suggestion. "Erica's right," he'd mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "I should probably stick to golf. More networking opportunities." I'd watched her delete contacts from his phone during family gatherings, her manicured fingers swiping names away with surgical precision. "Just helping you stay organized, sweetie," she'd coo, though I noticed she never deleted the numbers of women she'd approved of, his ex-girlfriends who still sent him Christmas cards and birthday wishes. The family dinners were perhaps the cruelest torture of all. Every Sunday we'd gather around Elise's mahogany dining table and somehow, always somehow, I'd end up seated at the far end, beside Cody who spoke maybe 10 words per evening. Erica claimed her rightful place at Wesley's side, where she could whisper family jokes and shared memories that I'd never be part of. "How's that little job of yours going?" Elise would ask with manufactured interest, the word little hanging in the air like a judgment. "Actually, I got promoted to senior account manager," I'd reply, trying to inject pride into my voice. "Oh, how nice," Elise would respond, then immediately pivot. "Erica, tell everyone about your charity work with the hospital board. Such important connections she's making." I'd begun bringing wine to these dinners just to have something to do with my hands during the long stretches of being ignored. The bottle became my security blanket, something to unwrap and pour when the conversation inevitably turned to family history I wasn't part of, achievements that predated my existence, or future plans that somehow never included me. Everything shifted when Garrett passed away. The man who'd been kind to me, who'd made an effort to include me in conversations and ask about my work, was suddenly gone. And with his death came a transformation in the family dynamic that I hadn't seen coming. The funeral should have been about grief, about celebrating a life well lived. Instead, it became a strange sort of audition with various family members positioning themselves as the rightful inheritors of Garrett's legacy. I heard phrases like, "carrying on his vision," and "maintaining family standards," whispered between hymns and eulogies. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Documents were shuffled away when I approached. Wesley began staying late at Erica's house for family business meetings that I was never invited to attend. "It's just boring estate stuff," he'd tell me when he'd come home after 10 o'clock, smelling like Erica's expensive coffee and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who'd been making difficult decisions. "Nothing you'd be interested in." But I was interested. I was his wife. I was supposed to be part of these decisions, part of this family's future. Instead, I was being systematically excluded from planning my own life. Standing in that hallway now, eavesdropping on the women who were supposed to love me, everything finally made perfect, devastating sense. The casual cruelty in their voices was somehow worse than outright anger would have been. This wasn't passionate hatred. This was cold calculation, like discussing the weather or planning a grocery list. I set the tea tray down on the hallway table with shaking hands, the fine china singing a soft, mournful note. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain they'd hear it through the walls, but their conversation continued, unaware of my presence. Walking back to the kitchen on unsteady legs, I gripped the marble countertop and tried to process what I'd just learned. For 3 years I'd been playing a game where I didn't know the rules, fighting a battle I didn't realize was being waged. But now I knew. And knowledge, I was about to discover, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. In the weeks that followed my accidental discovery in the hallway, I became a student of deception. I perfected the art of appearing unchanged while cataloging every subtle shift in my husband's behavior. Wesley had always been an early riser, but now he lingered over his morning coffee with an intensity that suggested serious contemplation. His usual quick scan of emails had turned into prolonged sessions of staring at his laptop screen, as if wrestling with invisible demons. The bomb dropped on a Tuesday morning in October. I was buttering toast when Wesley cleared his throat in that particular way that meant he had something unpleasant to discuss. The same throat clearing that had preceded conversations about visiting his mother more often or attending charity galas I found insufferable. "I've been thinking about our financial planning," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar formality. "Erica suggested we should rework the will. You know, standard protection in case of complications." The butter knife slipped from my fingers, clattering against the granite countertop. Wesley's eyes remained fixed on his coffee mug, studying the dark liquid as if it contained prophecies about our future. The morning light streaming through our kitchen window suddenly felt harsh, illuminating the growing distance between us with cruel clarity. "Complications?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the flutter of panic in my chest. "Divorce," he said flatly, still refusing to meet my gaze. "It's just smart planning. Protecting family assets." The phrase "standard protection" rolled off his tongue with rehearsed precision, like a memorized script performed by an amateur actor. These weren't Wesley's words. They belonged to someone else. Someone who had spent considerable time coaching him on this conversation. The man I'd married would have stumbled over such clinical language, would have softened the blow with apologies and explanations. I thought we could discuss it together. I suggested testing the waters. Maybe meet with a lawyer ourselves? Wesley's cup clinked against the saucer as he set it down too forcefully. Erica's already handled the research. She found an excellent attorney who specializes in estate planning. Very thorough. Of course she had. Erica, the ever-efficient puppet master, had already pulled the strings while I remained blissfully unaware. The invisible noose was tightening and I hadn't even felt it slip around my neck. Days passed without further mention of legal documents or family protection. Wesley resumed his normal routines. Morning jogs, evening news, weekend golf games, as if he hadn't just announced his intention to legally erase me from his future. The normalcy felt surreal, like living in a house scheduled for demolition while pretending the wrecking ball wasn't already swinging. I began paying closer attention to his habits, noting when he received calls that required him to step outside, when his laptop sessions extended past midnight, when he mentioned impromptu meetings that hadn't been on his calendar that morning. The man who had once shared every detail of his day now operated with the secretive efficiency of a spy. The discovery came accidentally, as most life-altering revelations do. Wesley had rushed out for an emergency golf game. Apparently, someone in his foursome had cancelled, and they needed a replacement immediately. In his haste, he'd left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, the screen glowing with unfinished business. I walked past it twice before curiosity overcame my respect for privacy. A document was open in a browser tab and my own name caught my eye like a flashing neon sign. My heart began hammering against my ribs as I leaned closer to read. Last Will and Testament of Wesley James Morrison. The words swam before my eyes as I scanned the legal language, searching for familiar names and recognizable terms. There was Wesley's name, of course, and Elisa's and various charitable organizations that the family had supported for years. I found Erica's name listed in multiple capacities, as beneficiary, as executor, as the person entrusted with carrying out Wesley's final wishes. My name appeared exactly once, in a paragraph that had been crossed out with digital strike-through formatting. Where Sarah Elizabeth Morrison had once stood as primary beneficiary, Erica's full name now claimed that position. The document was dated 3 days earlier. They had moved with military precision while I remained completely oblivious. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, frantically capturing screenshots of the screen. The first attempt was blurry, my trembling fingers unable to hold steady. The second was too dark. By the third try, tears were clouding my vision, but I managed to document the evidence of my own erasure. Seeing my name struck through felt like reading my own obituary while still breathing. The clinical efficiency of it was almost more devastating than the betrayal itself. I hadn't been removed in anger or passion. I'd been eliminated with the same careful consideration one might use to cancel a magazine subscription. The weekend following this discovery, Erica orchestrated one of her famous family brunches. These gatherings were typically torture sessions disguised as social events, but this particular Sunday carried an atmosphere of celebration that I couldn't quite identify. The mimosas flowed more freely, the laughter rang more genuine, and everyone seemed to move with the relaxed confidence of people who had successfully completed a difficult task. Erica floated through the gathering like a queen surveying her kingdom, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen it. She wore a new dress, something expensive in a shade of emerald that complemented her complexion perfectly, and carried herself with the satisfied air of someone who had just won a significant victory. "I'd like to propose a toast," she announced, raising her crystal champagne flute high above the assembled family. "To future security and family wisdom." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Future security, code for the financial arrangements that no longer included me. Family wisdom, praise for the collective decision to protect assets from the outsider who had somehow infiltrated their ranks. Elise clinked her glass with enthusiasm, her eyes bright with what I now recognized as relief. Other family members joined the toast with varying degrees of understanding, some clearly in on the joke while others simply enjoyed the festive atmosphere. Wesley participated in the toast but never looked in my direction. His eyes remained fixed on some point beyond my shoulder, as if I had become invisible, a ghost already haunting the periphery of his life. The man who had once caught my eye across crowded rooms and winked at our private jokes now treated me like furniture, present but irrelevant. I felt like an uninvited guest at my own wake, watching people celebrate my departure while I sat among them still breathing. The conversations flowed around me without including me, family members sharing knowing glances and inside jokes that I was no longer meant to understand. That evening, I finally confronted Wesley in our bedroom as he prepared for sleep. The day's charade had drained my reserves of patience and politeness. "I know about the will," I said simply, standing in the doorway as he folded his clothes with mechanical precision. He didn't flinch, didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if he'd been waiting for this conversation and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. "It's just in case," he said, his voice carrying the same rehearsed quality I'd heard over breakfast weeks earlier. "Erica says it's standard protection. The family has invested too much in building our reputation to risk it all on emotions." The word emotions dripped with disdain, as if love and commitment were childish concepts that practical adults needed to outgrow. This stranger wearing my husband's face spoke in Erica's cadence, using her phrases, echoing her priorities. "The man I married would have discussed this with me first," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Wesley shrugged, actually shrugged, as if my feelings were a minor inconvenience in his larger financial planning strategy. "Things change. We have to be realistic about the future." Standing there in our bedroom watching him methodically prepare for sleep after casually discussing my legal erasure, I realized I was grieving not just our marriage but the entire person I thought I had known. The Wesley who had written me love letters during our courtship, who had promised to cherish me through all of life's changes, had been systematically replaced by this hollow replica who spoke in corporate buzzwords and family-first platitudes. They expected tears. They anticipated drama, accusations, perhaps even threats of legal action. Instead, I smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile that seemed to unsettle Wesley more than any tantrum could have. "You're right," I said, moving to embrace him with the same warmth I'd shown for 3 years. "Family should come first. I'm so grateful Erica is looking out for everyone's best interests." My performance was flawless. I thanked them for their wisdom, praised their foresight, and expressed genuine appreciation for their careful planning. Inside, I felt the strange calm that comes after surviving a natural disaster, the eerie quiet that follows destruction, when the storm has passed and the real work begins. They mistook my serenity for surrender, my grace for defeat. How could they know that while they had been plotting my legal elimination, I had been conducting research of my own? How could they suspect that their precious family bloodline, the very foundation of their superiority complex, was about to crumble under the weight of scientific truth? I hugged each of them goodbye that Sunday with genuine affection, knowing it would be the last time I touched them as the naive woman who had believed in their love. When I walked out of Erica's house, I left behind every illusion about my place in their family. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I carried with me something far more valuable than their approval. I carried the knowledge that would soon turn their perfectly orchestrated world into ash. The knowledge I carried felt like carrying live ammunition, dangerous, powerful, and requiring careful handling. In the days following my discovery of their legal maneuvering, I moved through our house like a ghost, observing everything with new eyes while they remained blissfully unaware that their target had already armed herself for war. My weapon of choice had actually revealed itself weeks earlier, during one of my late-night internet sessions when sleep proved elusive. A bright banner advertisement had flashed across my screen. "Discover your true heritage. Connect with unknown relatives. Unlock family secrets." The irony of that last phrase would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so focused on survival. Initially, I'd scrolled past the ad without interest. Genealogy seemed like a hobby for people with too much time and too little drama in their lives. But something made me click back, perhaps the same instinct that had kept me listening at doorways and watching faces for subtle changes in expression. The Ancestry Service promised scientific accuracy in tracing bloodlines, matching DNA patterns with precision that courtrooms accepted as evidence. As I read testimonials from people who had discovered long-lost siblings, learned about unexpected ethnic backgrounds, and uncovered family mysteries spanning generations, an idea began forming in the shadows of my mind. I started researching genealogy with the intensity of someone preparing for doctoral exams. Late nights found me hunched over my laptop, learning about DNA matching algorithms, inheritance patterns, and the statistical probability of various family relationships. The science fascinated me, but more importantly, it offered possibilities I hadn't previously considered. During family gatherings, I began studying faces with renewed interest. Garrett's strong jawline had been passed down to Wesley with remarkable clarity, along with those distinctive brown eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. But Erica? The more I observed her features, the more they seemed borrowed from some other genetic palette entirely. Her delicate bone structure bore no resemblance to Garrett's robust build. Her green eyes appeared nowhere else in the family tree. Even her laugh carried a different musical quality than the deep, hearty chuckles that characterized Morrison family humor. These observations might mean nothing. Genetics could be surprisingly creative in its combinations, but they planted seeds of possibility that began growing in fertile soil. The perfect opportunity presented itself in the form of Elisa's 72nd birthday celebration. She had always made grand productions of family milestones, insisting on elaborate dinners and meaningful gift exchanges that reinforced the bonds of blood and belonging. This particular birthday fell just 3 weeks after my devastating discovery about the will, giving me barely enough time to orchestrate my response. I practiced my pitch in the bathroom mirror until my enthusiasm felt genuine and spontaneous. The reflection staring back at me looked like the dutiful daughter-in-law they expected, eager to please, grateful to be included, slightly naive about the complexities of family dynamics. Perfect. I have such a fun idea for a family project, I announced during dessert, producing 4 elegantly wrapped boxes from my oversized purse. The packages were identical in size and wrapping, tied with cream-colored satin ribbons that matched Elisa's favorite china pattern. Ancestry DNA kits, I exclaimed, distributing the gifts with theatrical excitement. I thought it would be amazing to trace our family heritage together. Imagine discovering where all this incredible Morrison strength and intelligence comes from. The response exceeded my wildest expectations. Elise actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child, her eyes sparkling with genuine pleasure. What a thoughtful idea! How exciting to learn about our roots together. Wesley rolled his eyes in that affectionate way husbands display when their wives suggest activities they find mildly silly but harmless. Do we really need science to tell us we're related? He asked, but his tone carried amusement rather than resistance. Erica's reaction proved most interesting. For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, her smile faltered and something flickered across her features that might have been concern. But the expression vanished so quickly I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. What a unique gift, she said carefully, turning the box over in her hands as if examining it for hidden dangers. I've never really thought about ancestry research. Cody, predictably, said nothing but nodded along with whatever enthusiasm his wife displayed, his role as perpetual agreement machine continuing without variation. The cost of the kits, $400, represented a significant expense on my modest salary, but I considered it the best investment I'd ever made. These small boxes contain the potential to reshape everything, to turn their carefully constructed world into something unrecognizable. Over the following days, I orchestrated the sample collection with military precision. Each family member needed to provide saliva samples according to specific instructions, and I volunteered to handle all the administrative details to ensure accuracy. My helpfulness was praised as typical thoughtfulness, when in reality it was calculated control. I hand-delivered each sealed sample to the postal facility myself, unwilling to trust such crucial evidence to regular mail pickup. The return address labels were filled out in my careful handwriting, ensuring that all results would come directly to me for coordination purposes. The waiting period stretched 8 weeks, 56 days that I counted off my calendar like a prisoner marking time until parole. I established a separate email account specifically for receiving results, checking it multiple times daily despite knowing the samples required substantial processing time. During those weeks, I became a master of normalcy. I attended family dinners with appropriate enthusiasm, participated in conversations about holiday planning and summer vacation possibilities, and maintained the facade of the grateful wife who had been graciously forgiven for imaginary transgressions. But beneath the surface, anticipation hummed through my veins like electricity. I was no longer the passive recipient of their machinations. I had become an active player in a game they didn't even realize had begun. When the results finally arrived, I felt like an archaeologist uncovering artifacts that would rewrite history. The digital files contained charts, percentages, and genetic maps that told stories more explosive than any family gossip. I spent hours analyzing the data, cross-referencing relationships, and ensuring I understood every nuance before proceeding. The custom design service I hired specialized in genealogical presentations for family reunions and anniversary celebrations. For $200, they created beautifully framed family trees with each person's unique genetic heritage displayed in elegant calligraphy. The charts looked official, precious, and worthy of prominent display in any family home. I selected colors and borders based on each family member's personal preferences. Wesley's chart featured navy blue accents that matched his favorite ties, while Elise's incorporated soft lavender tones she favored for spring decorating. Every detail was personalized to make the gifts feel thoughtful and celebratory rather than clinical or threatening. The irony wasn't lost on me as I wrapped each frame in delicate tissue paper and tied them with matching ribbons. I was literally gift-wrapping their destruction, presenting devastating truth in the most beautiful packaging I could create. The visual metaphor felt almost too perfect to be coincidental. Elise and Garrett's anniversary gathering provided the ideal venue for my revelation. For 47 years, their marriage had been held up as the gold standard of family commitment and traditional values. Family members would travel from 3 states to attend this annual celebration of enduring love and shared legacy. "I'm bringing something very special to honor your parents' incredible partnership," I told Wesley when confirming our attendance. "Something that celebrates the beautiful family they created together." He smiled indulgently, probably assuming I'd commissioned a portrait or compiled a photo album. His trust in my harmless intentions would make the impact even more devastating. As the anniversary date approached, I alternated between thrilling excitement and nauseating terror. The anticipation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I stepped forward, there would be no possibility of retreat. Everything, our marriage, their family, the entire structure of relationships I'd known for 3 years, was about to shatter into irreparable pieces. But after what they had done to me, after the casual cruelty and calculated erasure, I discovered that destruction felt remarkably like justice. The afternoon of the anniversary gathering arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that made tragic endings feel especially cruel. Sunlight streamed through Elise's bay windows, casting everything in golden hues that would later feel like the last moments of innocence before a nuclear blast. I arrived carrying a vintage cake box containing Elise's favorite lemon torte and a carefully arranged gift bag holding 4 wrapped frames. My hands were steady now, my heartbeat calm. The weeks of anticipation had crystallized into an almost supernatural focus. This was my moment and I intended to savor every second. The living room buzzed with the comfortable chaos of family celebration. Cousins from Chicago shared updates about their children's college acceptances. Uncle Robert regaled anyone within earshot with stories about his recent fishing expedition. Aunt Margaret fluttered between conversations, ensuring everyone's wine glass remained full and that the cheese platter maintained its artistic arrangement. Elise presided over the gathering like a benevolent queen, her silver hair perfectly styled and her navy dress accessorized with the pearl necklace Garrett had given her for their 25th anniversary. She glowed with the satisfaction of a woman whose life had unfolded exactly according to plan: devoted husband, successful children, financial security, and the respect of everyone who mattered. Wesley worked the room with practiced ease, discussing business developments with the men and complimenting the women on their spring fashion choices. He looked handsome in the gray sweater I'd bought him for Christmas, though I now noticed how he avoided meeting my eyes for extended periods. The guilt was probably eating at him, even if he didn't have the backbone to act on it. Erica commanded her usual position as social director, orchestrating conversations and ensuring that every guest felt appropriately entertained. She wore emerald green, always her most flattering color, and her confidence radiated through the room like a force field. Today she was the beloved daughter celebrating her parents' remarkable partnership, basking in the reflected glory of their enduring love story. I positioned myself strategically near the doorway, close enough to observe every reaction but with a clear escape route if the situation deteriorated beyond my control. From this vantage point I could see the entire room while remaining slightly removed from the central gathering, the perfect spot for a woman about to detonate a bomb. Before we cut the cake, I announced during a natural lull in conversation, I have something special to share with the family. I produced the gift bag with theatrical flourish, my voice carrying just the right note of excited anticipation. Remember those ancestry kits from Elise's birthday? The results came back and they're absolutely fascinating. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Elise clapped her hands together with childlike delight, while several family members expressed genuine curiosity about the genetic revelations. Even Uncle Robert, typically skeptical of anything involving modern technology, leaned forward with interest. I had them professionally framed, I continued, distributing the packages with ceremonious care. Each one is personalized with your individual heritage map. I thought it would be wonderful to unveil them together as a family. The wrapping paper rustled as 8 hands worked simultaneously to reveal the contents. I watched their faces with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment, memorizing every microexpression, every subtle shift in comprehension, every moment of dawning realization. Elise opened hers first, her fingers trembling slightly with excitement. The initial smile of anticipation transformed gradually into confusion, then concern, then something approaching horror. Her eyes darted across the genetic percentages, the family relationship indicators, the stark scientific data that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her own life. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continued rustling of wrapping paper. This says Erica and I are only a 50% match. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, acrid and impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath while trying to process the implications of what they'd just heard. Wesley stared at his own chart with the expression of someone trying to read a foreign language. His lips moved silently as he traced the family connections with his finger, attempting to reconcile the scientific data with the family history he'd known since childhood. He read the document once, twice, 3 times as if repetition might somehow change the results. Erica's face underwent a transformation that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been so devastating. The confident glow drained from her complexion like water from a broken vessel, leaving behind a pale, hollow version of her former self. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for oxygen in an environment where breathing had suddenly become impossible. The silence stretched taut as a violin string until Cody broke it, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. He stood slowly, his own chart trembling in his hands like a leaf in a windstorm. It's not a mistake, he said, his tone carrying the flat certainty of someone stating an undeniable fact. According to this, Erica isn't Garrett's biological daughter. The crystal wine glass that slipped from Aunt Margaret's fingers seemed to fall in slow motion, its destruction creating a percussion that punctuated the moment with finality. The sound of shattering crystal was deafening in the absolute silence that had engulfed the room. Then came the gasps, sharp intakes of breath from people whose world had just shifted off its axis. Whispered conversations erupted like small fires around the room as family members turned to each other for confirmation, explanation, anything that might make sense of what they'd just learned. This can't be right, Elise managed, but her voice carried no conviction. Her hand went instinctively to her throat, that universal gesture people make when they can't catch their breath. The carefully maintained composure she'd cultivated over decades began cracking like old paint under pressure. Uncle Robert was the first to flee, grabbing his coat and muttering something about early morning appointments. His wife followed quickly, their departure creating a ripple effect that swept through the gathering like a contagion. Within minutes, people were making excuses and heading for the door, unable to process the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. Cousin Janet paused at the threshold, her face a mask of shock and disgust. If she lied about that, she said to no one in particular, what else has she lied about? The question hung in the air like an accusation that would follow the family for generations. Erica finally found her voice, though it emerged as a strangled sound that bore little resemblance to her usual authoritative tone. This is ridiculous, she declared, but the words lacked any real force. She stormed toward the door, her coordination so compromised by shock that she nearly knocked over the anniversary cake. Its cheerful happy 47th anniversary message now seeming like a mockery of everything the family had believed about their history. Elise aged a decade in the span of 10 minutes. The confident matriarch who had entered the afternoon dissolved before my eyes, replaced by a smaller, fragile woman whose entire identity had just been revealed as fiction. Her pearl necklace seemed suddenly too heavy for her delicate neck, and her hands shook as she tried unsuccessfully to process the ruins of her carefully constructed life. Wesley remained frozen in his chair, the genetic chart spread across his lap like a death certificate. His expression wasn't anger or confusion. It was the hollow, devastated look of someone who had just learned that everything he'd built his identity around was fundamentally false. I stood quietly in my corner, watching the destruction with the calm satisfaction of someone who had finally balanced an equation that had been troubling her for years. When the room had nearly emptied and only Wesley remained among the scattered gift wrap and abandoned wine glasses, I approached him with the same graceful composure I'd maintained throughout our marriage. "Next time you rewrite the future," I said, my voice steady and clear, "make sure your past isn't so fragile." Then I walked out through the front door, past the wilted spring flowers and abandoned cars in the driveway, leaving behind the smoking crater that had once been the Morrison family legacy. My legs felt unsteady, but my conscience was crystal clear. Justice, I discovered, tasted exactly like freedom. The drive home from Elise's house felt like traveling through a different dimension where gravity worked differently and colors had shifted to unfamiliar hues. My hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, not from fear, but from the strange euphoria that follows the successful completion of something monumentally difficult. I had just detonated a nuclear device in the middle of a family gathering, and somehow I felt more at peace than I had in months. The first sign that my carefully planted seeds were taking root came Tuesday morning when my phone buzzed with a text from Maria, Wesley's cousin who worked at the bank downtown. "Emergency family meeting tonight at Elise's. Thought you should know." She included a crying face emoji, as if the family crisis were a natural disaster rather than a long overdue reckoning. I didn't respond. There was nothing left for me to say to any of them. By Wednesday, the ripple effects had grown into tidal waves. Jessica, who ran the local flower shop and had always been friendly despite my outsider status, called with barely contained excitement masquerading as concern. "Sarah, honey, I just wanted to check on you. There are some wild rumors going around about Wesley's family." Her voice carried that particular tone people use when they're fishing for gossip while pretending to offer support. "Oh." I kept my response neutral, though I was genuinely curious about how the story was spreading. "Well, Donna from the country club said something about paternity issues. And apparently Erica hasn't been seen anywhere since Sunday. Her husband Cody came into the hardware store yesterday looking like he'd been hit by a truck." The speed of the gossip network impressed me. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, a scandal this juicy would spread faster than wildfire in August. Thursday brought confirmation that the damage was even more extensive than I'd anticipated. My former neighbor Linda caught me checking the mail and practically sprinted across the street to share the latest intelligence. "Did you hear about Elise calling that emergency meeting?" she asked breathlessly, her eyes bright with the thrill of being first to share devastating news. Only 3 people showed up. 3. Out of the entire extended family. Everyone else suddenly had prior commitments. The mental image of Elise sitting in her pristine living room, waiting for family members who would never arrive, filled me with something that wasn't quite satisfaction but certainly wasn't sympathy either. For years she had commanded the loyalty and attendance of dozens of relatives. Now when she needed them most, they had scattered like leaves in a hurricane. "And that's not even the worst part," Linda continued, leaning closer as if someone might overhear us on my own driveway. "Apparently, Erica's completely disappeared from social media. Her Instagram account, you know how she was always posting those perfect family photos? It's completely silent. Nothing for 4 days." I had actually checked this myself, unable to resist monitoring the destruction from a safe distance. Erica's Instagram had indeed gone dark after years of daily posts celebrating family values, holiday traditions, and the blessed life of being born into the right bloodline. The silence spoke louder than any explanation could have. The most devastating blow came Friday when Linda updated me on Cody's response to the revelation. "He moved out," she whispered, her voice carrying genuine shock. "Just packed his things and left. Barbara saw him loading boxes into his truck Wednesday night. Didn't even take the fancy furniture. Just his clothes and that old fishing equipment from the garage." The speed of Cody's departure surprised even me. I had expected anger, confrontation, perhaps even attempts to salvage the marriage despite the lies. Instead, he had simply vanished, leaving behind only the detritus of a relationship built on false foundations. Left his wedding ring on the kitchen counter, Linda added with the dramatic flair of someone who understood the symbolic power of abandoned jewelry. No note, no explanation. Just the ring and empty drawers. Meanwhile, my phone had become a monument to Wesley's deteriorating mental state. The calls began Sunday evening, just hours after I'd walked out of his mother's house. Initially, his voicemails carried the indignant tone of someone who believed he could explain away the unexplainable. "Sarah, this is insane. We need to talk about this rationally. There has to be some mistake with those tests. Call me back." Tuesday's messages evolved into something more desperate. "Please, Sarah. I know you're angry, but we can work through this. The family is falling apart. I need you to help me understand what's happening." By Thursday, the anger had transformed into raw pleading. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about the will, about everything. I should have talked to you first. I should have trusted you instead of listening to. Please just answer the phone." The final voicemails were perhaps the most heartbreaking, not because I felt sorry for him, but because they revealed the complete dissolution of a man who had never learned to think for himself. These messages contained no words, just the sound of breathing, as if he had called simply to feel connected to something familiar in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. After 6 weeks of this digital haunting, I changed my number. The decision felt like cutting the last thread that connected me to a life I had finally outgrown. The social fallout proved even more spectacular than the family destruction. Elise, who had once commanded the respect and envy of the country club crowd, suddenly found herself persona non grata in circles where reputation meant everything. Invitations that had once arrived weekly simply stopped coming. Bridge games continued without her. Charity committee meetings somehow forgot to include her in planning discussions. I learned through various sources that she had started shopping in the next town over, apparently unable to face the whispered conversations and knowing looks that followed her everywhere in our community. The woman who had built her identity on social standing and family legacy now found herself effectively exiled from the very society she had worked so hard to impress. Even Garrett's memory suffered collateral damage. The memorial plaque that had honored his business contributions at the community center was quietly removed during routine maintenance that never quite resulted in its reinstallation. Decades of respect and admiration evaporated as people began questioning everything they thought they knew about the Morrison family. The legal implications proved even more devastating than the social consequences. Wesley's carefully orchestrated will, the document that was supposed to protect family assets from unworthy wives, became meaningless paperwork overnight. With Erica's paternity in question, her inheritance eligibility created a legal nightmare that consumed money faster than they could pay attorneys to untangle it. Wesley was forced to hire 3 different law firms just to understand his own financial situation. The estate they had fought so hard to protect from me was being devoured by legal fees and investigative costs. Private investigators charged thousands of dollars trying to identify Erica's biological father. A mystery that seemed to have no solution since Elise remained stubbornly silent about her past indiscretions. During this chaos, I quietly began rebuilding my life according to my own specifications. I found a small apartment with enormous windows that filled the space with natural light, something I had missed during my years in Wesley's traditionally decorated house. The walls remained beautifully bare, free from family photos and wedding pictures that would only remind me of my previous naive self. For the first time in years, I could eat dinner without carefully monitoring my words, without worrying about accidentally saying something that might be reported back to Erica or Elise. The silence in my new home wasn't lonely. It was liberating, like finally being able to breathe after holding my breath for 3 years. Occasionally, I would catch my reflection in store windows and realize I was smiling without any particular reason. The expression looked foreign on my face after so many months of practiced politeness and manufactured happiness. But it felt genuine, earned through survival rather than circumstance. Peace, I discovered, was vastly underrated. And justice, when served at exactly the right temperature, tasted remarkably like freedom. Time, I discovered, was an excellent teacher. 3 years had passed since the anniversary gathering that became ground zero for the Morrison family's destruction, and I had learned to measure my life in seasons rather than catastrophes. Spring brought new flower varieties to experiment with. Summer delivered steady streams of wedding clients. Autumn provided reflection time, and winter offered the luxury of planning without pressure. The morning Wesley's wedding invitation arrived, I was repotting a particularly stubborn orchid that had been refusing to bloom despite perfect care. The envelope appeared among my usual mail: utility bills, supplier catalogs, a postcard from a former coworker vacationing in Italy, looking deceptively innocent for something that would reopen old wounds. The invitation itself was as impersonal as a business announcement. Crisp white cardstock with conservative black lettering announced the upcoming marriage of Wesley James Morrison to someone named Jennifer Louise Patterson. The font was traditional, the wording formal, and the overall design suggested it had been ordered from a catalog rather than personally selected with care and excitement. The honor of your presence is requested. The phrase made me laugh out loud, a sound that echoed strangely in my quiet apartment. Honor? From a man who had conspired to erase me from his future while I slept beside him every night? The audacity would have been admirable if it weren't so pathetic. I studied the bride's name with the analytical interest of someone examining evidence. Jennifer Louise Patterson. The name sounded respectable, traditional, probably from a family with proper bloodlines and appropriate social connections. I wondered if Wesley had told her about Erica's spectacular fall from grace, or if he had simply edited that chapter from his personal history the way he tried to edit me from his will. The wedding date was 6 weeks away, just enough time for a perfectly orchestrated response. I spent an hour researching ancestry DNA companies, selecting one with the fastest processing time and most comprehensive family matching database. The kit cost $49, a small investment for what promised to be significant entertainment. I packaged it carefully in an elegant gift box, adding tissue paper and a satin ribbon that matched the wedding colors listed on the invitation. The note took longer to compose than the gift selection. I wrote and rewrote it several times, seeking the perfect balance between congratulations and warning, blessing and curse. Dear Jennifer, I finally settled on, congratulations on your upcoming marriage. As a gift, I thought you might enjoy learning about the family heritage you're joining, just in case you're planning a family of your own. Wishing you all the clarity you deserve. Sarah. I scheduled the delivery for the day before the wedding. Timing, as I had learned, was everything. By the time they opened it, they would be too committed to the ceremony to back out, but not too late to begin questioning what other secrets might be lurking in Wesley's family tree. The real transformation in my life, however, had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with rediscovering who I was when no one was watching or judging. 2 years after my divorce finalized, I used my settlement money to lease a small storefront on the town's main street. The space had good bones. Large windows, original hardwood floors, and enough room for both a workshop and a customer area. Willow and Bloom became more than just a business. It became my sanctuary. The name came to me during one of my late-night planning sessions, inspired by the resilience of willow trees that bend without breaking and the promise of flowers that bloom even after the harshest winters. Working with flowers awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. There was something deeply healing about creating beauty from individual elements, about coaxing life from stems and petals, about watching people's faces light up when they saw an arrangement that perfectly captured their emotions. My style developed organically, influenced more by instinct than formal training. I became known for unexpected combinations, pairing delicate roses with sturdy succulents, mixing wildflowers with exotic orchids, creating arrangements that shouldn't have worked but somehow achieved perfect harmony. Beauty from chaos, my regular customers called it, and the phrase became my unofficial motto. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the bakery next door, was my first regular customer and eventually became something like a friend. She ordered fresh arrangements for her display case every Monday and always lingered to chat about everything except what we both knew about my history with the Morrison family. "You have magic hands," she told me one afternoon, admiring a particularly successful combination of sunflowers and lavender. "But more than that, you have a peaceful spirit. People feel it when they walk in here." He was right. Clients often stayed longer than necessary, sharing details about their lives that had nothing to do with flower orders. Young mothers talked about the challenges of raising children while pursuing careers. Older women confided their fears about aging and irrelevance. Divorced women sought advice about rebuilding their identities after decades of defining themselves through their marriages. I listened without judgment, offered gentle encouragement without presuming to have all the answers. And somehow my little shop became an unofficial counseling center disguised as a flower boutique. The afternoon Elise appeared outside my window will remain etched in my memory with perfect clarity. I was arranging white lilies for a funeral service when I noticed her standing on the sidewalk, staring through the glass with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Vulnerability mixed with something that might have been regret. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Her hair, once perfectly styled, showed silver roots that suggested recent neglect of her usual beauty routine. Her posture lacked the confident bearing that had once made her seem taller than her actual height. For several minutes she simply stood there, occasionally glancing toward the door as if considering whether to enter. I continued working, pretending not to notice her presence while keeping her in my peripheral vision. Finally, she approached the window and pressed her palm against the glass, a gesture so tentative and desperate that I found myself moving closer. Our eyes met through the transparent barrier that might as well have been a chasm. I could see her lips moving, forming a single word that I read rather than heard: sorry. The apology hung between us for a moment that felt both eternal and insufficient. I nodded once, not in forgiveness but in acknowledgement. Some wounds heal, but they never forget the blade that caused them. She turned and walked away without attempting to enter the shop, her footsteps heavy with the weight of consequences she could never undo. After she disappeared around the corner, I watered my plants with extra care, feeling grateful for growth that came from truth rather than manipulation. The Morrison family's final chapter was being written without fanfare or drama. Cody's remarriage to a kindergarten teacher with laugh lines provided the most hopeful epilogue to the whole sordid story. His new wife, Emma, possessed all the warmth and genuine kindness that Erica had only pretended to have. They seemed happy in the simple, unremarkable way that healthy relationships appear when viewed from the outside. Erica herself had vanished from our community entirely, reportedly working at a chain restaurant in a neighboring state and using her maiden name like a protective shield. Her absence from family gatherings created a strange void, not because people missed her presence, but because her erasure made everyone uncomfortably aware of how thoroughly someone could disappear when the foundation of their identity proved to be quicksand. Family reunions continued, but they were smaller affairs now, attended by people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company rather than felt obligated to maintain appearances. The conversations were more honest, the laughter more genuine, and the overall atmosphere suggested that sometimes losing toxic members actually strengthens what remains. In the end, I realized that the best revenge truly wasn't dramatic confrontation or elaborate schemes designed to humiliate enemies. The best revenge was simply living well, finding peace, and allowing truth to do its own work in its own time. They had tried to write me out of their story, not realizing that I was already writing theirs. Their carefully constructed legacy had crumbled not because I destroyed it, but because I simply revealed what was already there. A foundation built on lies that could never support the weight of real scrutiny. The will they had changed so carefully became meaningless paperwork, useless as protection against consequences they had created themselves. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step aside and let people face the natural results of their own choices. My name might have been erased from their legal documents, but in the end, their names became whispered warnings about the price of deception, while mine became associated with resilience, grace, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving betrayal with dignity intact. If this story of sweet revenge had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sarah served those personalized ancestry charts, knowing exactly what devastation was coming next. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.